Welcome back to the beginner series. This is part 7, where we're going to be learning all about particles. So we're going to be using particles to create the sprinkles on our donut icing here. So particles are a very, very useful part of Blender or any 3D software, as it allows you to displace thousands of objects across another surface. So this is used if you're making grass, if you got a scene with rocks and you want to make thousands of rocks appear across the surface. Particles are very, very useful. And if you make large environments, you'll be using them frequently. So it's a very, very useful part. Plus, if you happen to stick around right to the end of this video, because I know it is a little long, I'll show you, just for fun, just as something completely stupid to end on, how to make donut sprinkles on a donut, if that makes sense. Donuts on donut. Yeah, anyways. So this is where we left off at the end of part 6. We've got our donut. We've got our wood texture on our thing. And now it's time to get a little bit more advanced with some sprinkles. So first things first, before we get into particles or any of that stuff, let's just make one sprinkle, okay? One sprinkle. So you could just, start modeling from memory. I know what a sprinkle looks like. It's a cylinder. It's a long cylinder, which is actually what I did when I made this scene. And then I posted it on Twitter and people were like, it doesn't look like a sprinkle. And I'm like, oh, really? I went and had a look on Google and lo and behold, sprinkles look different than my memory. So this is the second time I've recorded this tutorial, so I've already typed it in. Just go to Google, type in sprinkles, and look at this. This is what a sprinkle looks like. Essentially, colorful little turds, really. Just, that's exactly what they look like. So they're like little wonky cylinders with smoothed ends to them. That's basically it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's model one. So I'm going to go to layer 3, and let's add in a cylinder. So Shift A, Mesh, Cylinder. Now, just like what we did when we were modeling the coffee cup, we want to make sure that our that the number of vertices that we start with is it's important, right? So you want to, especially because we're going to be using this as a particle, and we could potentially use thousands of this sprinkle by itself. The number of vertices that you choose at this point is very important, because if you modeled a sprinkle really a high poly like this, and then you used it on a donut and there was 1,000 of them, your render times, when we get to rendering later on, would be ridiculous, and maybe it would even crash a computer. So you want to try and go as low poly as you can at this point that you've just added your cylinder. So I'm going to open up the toolbar, and here where it says vertices, I'm going to choose 8. You could go with 6, but it might be a little bit too low poly. But I'm going to go with 8, and I think that's a pretty good amount. And I'm going to close that. Now, obviously, a sprinkle isn't this fat, so we could scale it along the z-axis like that. But a better way, or I guess this is a new little tip for you that you could note this down, is if you want to scale on an axis, if you want to scale on every axis except one, if you hold down Shift and then Z in this case, it will scale along the X and the Y axes, but not the Z. So this is I wish I'd learned this keyboard shortcut years ago. I think I only just learned it maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. But it's super useful. Like in this case, it has the effect of it making this sprinkle look like it's shrinking in fatness, So yeah, you could do that like S, Shift, Z, and it will now scale it along the Z and the X, but not the Z. S, Shift, X, you get the point. Very useful. So it's Shift and then whatever you don't want to scale on. Very useful. Make sure you get the keyboard shortcut guide if you haven't already. So this is our sprinkle. Now, as I mentioned before, it's got a smoothed off end, and this was the fault that I made when I first made my sprinkle. I just had them as these hard capped pieces here, which looks fake. So to make that smoothed off end, I'm going to go into face select mode, and I'm just going to select this top face here, and I'm going to extrude it outwards very slightly like that, and then I'm just going to scale that inwards like that. Now, if you really wanted to, if you're maybe going for a super close up on the sprinkles, you could maybe add in more detail by doing that once more, just like that. But I personally think that's overkill. I don't think you'll actually notice it. So I'm just going to go with that. Again, trying to keep it as low poly as I possibly can. Very important. All right. So if we hit smooth shading, let's see how that looks. Not bad, not fantastic, but again, this is going to be a very tiny part of the image, so we're not going to see it in this high res in our final render anyway. Now, we could just duplicate our efforts and do the exact same thing down there, but I want to use this opportunity to talk about another really useful feature in Blender, which is the mirror modifier. So you want to reduce the amount of work that you do. You don't want to double up on any work. And particularly if you're making a character, for example, or a car or something like that, you don't want to have to model one side of the face and then have to do the exact same modeling on the other side, which is actually what I did when I first started Blender. I thought that that was what you had to do, which is ridiculous. So thankfully, there is a mirror modifier. So if you go to the modifier stacker and then click on add modifier, here you've got one that says mirror. So let's click that. Now, this allows you to mirror it on a particular axis, or you could mirror on all the axes. So the one that we want to mirror is, looking that this is vertical, we want to mirror it along the Z axis, like this. And you can see that it has now mirrored it, and we've got our cap along the bottom as well. But what you might not see in this view is that if you move around very slightly, you've got sort of a little bit of flickering. Maybe if I go into this mode, you could see it. Nope, you can't actually see it. Okay, but there's a tiny little bit of flickering. Like if I zoom right in there, you can see this little grated effect there. The reason for that is when you've got flickering, it means that you've got faces on top of faces and the software doesn't know which one to show, so it's flickering between them as you move around. Not good. The reason it's doing that is that this axis is based off your origin point, which is that tiny little orange dot that you've got in the center. That's what it is based off. So generally, what it's doing is it's taking everything that's above this, which is this whole area up here, and that part there as well, and it's now flipping it and placing it down there. But because you've got vertices underneath that as well, it's now mirroring it on top of it, and so you've now got this flickering effect. So let's take our bottom face here, and let's bring this up past that origin point, and now you can see what it's actually doing there. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have got no vertices beyond. Now you can really see the effect as I pull past it. You want to make sure that you've got no vertices past that origin point. So what you usually do is you pull the mesh up past your origin point there, and then if you turn on clipping in your mirror modifier stacker, when you pull it down, it will stop and you can't pull it any further, which is fantastic. So now that I've done that, I'm going to click, and now you can see that, look at that. We've got the mirror modifier and it's all working great. And we don't have that flickering effect anymore. However, just like when I was modeling the coffee cup, you don't want to have a face, which is directly in the middle of your mesh, which is what we have right now. So I'm going to hit X and then delete that face right there. Now, honestly, this was overkill. Like would have been easier if we just, did that same little thing down there. But it was an excuse because I wanted to show you this mirror modifier stacker here, because it is a very, very useful and heavily used modifier. It's right up there with the, subsurf modifier. It saves you work. So I want to talk about that. All right. So we've got our one sprinkle. Look at us. Let's bring back the rest of our scene here, holding down Shift as we click on the other layers there. Now, let's scale down this little sprinkle here. And just so that I don't forget it, when you scale down an object, remember that it's when you're doing that, you're changing its, I guess, its relative scale amount. And you never want to have a value that isn't 1. So I'm going to hit Control A, and I'm going to apply that scale there so that these are now reset to 1. We could have had it the way it was, but if we got to particles and we had these crazy looking particles, that would be bad. So I just want, in case I forgot and I got stuck, I'm just resetting that to the correct scale. So with our sprinkle, like if you had looked at, oh my goodness, excuse me, hang on a second. I do actually have a cold right now. I was going to delay doing this tutorial, but I'm actually flying off to go to the Blender conference in a couple of days. And I'll be out of the country for a month, so I can't do any more tutorials. So I got to wrap this up. So I got a bit of a cold. If you'd have seen me when I first started Blender, I would have hand placed these sprinkles here. So I would have rotated each single one of them like this. And there are some cases where you might even do this, but this is extremely time consuming, right? Nobody wants to do this. And when you're working like in 3D, you want to get into the habit of, cutting back on the amount of work that you do. It's why, you use model libraries when you can, if you're building a scene. Because like if you do everything by hand, stuff takes forever. So you want to use the tools that you have to actually cut back on time. So thankfully there is something called particles. So particles are used to take one object and then put it about on a plane thousands or as many times as you actually want. Let's just do it, and I'll show you the different types of particles. So you want to select the object that you want your thing to appear on. So in this case, it's the icing, not the donut. If you selected the donut, then you would actually have sprinkles that appear down here. So make sure it's the icing. And then go to the particles panel. And then here, just click on New. And whoa, Nelly, look at all these settings. Yeah, it's very confusing, but I'm going to walk you through it. All right, so stay with me. So there are two different types of particles in Blender. Now that you've added this first particle, if you go into wireframe mode and you actually hit Alt-A, you would see that you've got these, you've got some rain. Isn't that lovely? So the icing is now, it's raining, right? The reason for this is that the default setting of particles is the emitter type. So there are two different types, okay? So an emitter is animated particles. So you would use this anytime you want to have particles that are actually moving. But in our case, we want them to be stationary. So you would actually select hair. And now you can see, even though our animation is running, they are not moving at all. So you wouldn't think that hair is the one that you'd want. Like, really? Hair? Well, hair can be used just, for a character. If you've got hair, you can use this hair type here. But you can also use it so that instead of each of these little spikes, instead of each of these strands for the hair, you replace those strands with an object, which is exactly what we want to use it for. So even though it sounds like that's not the one you'd want, hair is actually used whenever you want to displace the objects. So that's what we've set. Now, you'll notice that the hair is actually pointing inwards, like that. And if we actually, set this sprinkle here to appear there, you wouldn't actually see it because it would be on the other side of our icing, like inside the donut. So how do we do that? Well, this is caused by the direction that our normals are facing. So if we go into edit mode, hit Alt-H if you don't see a mesh like I do. And if you push N in your properties panel, go right down where it says mesh display, and then it says normal, and just click on the one that is the face. Now these blue lines will tell you which direction your mesh is pointing out. Now this is actually correct, okay? It's correct because the normal, although we haven't really spoken about this very much, a normal is which direction the mesh is doing the shading on, okay? Because generally, like each face here, these faces, whoops, like really, like they're double-sided. Like you can view it from this way, and then you can also see the face on that direction. But the shading is generally on only one face. So the normal is telling the software what's the outside of the mesh and what's the inside of the mesh. So generally the biggest cause if you've got horrible shading in your mesh is that the normals are pointing the wrong way on all of your mesh or part of your mesh. So a common keyboard shortcut is you select your entire mesh and you hit Control-Shift-N, and it will actually clear your normals. But actually, if I did it like that, I wouldn't actually want that because you do actually want these faced out like this. Now, the reason we actually have to flip this in this case is because of something very odd, and I only really realized this when I was putting together this tutorial. I'm like, why is this actually happening? Why is the hair facing inwards? And it's because we've got the solidify modifier, which is doing something. Actually, let me try this. Hang on a second, maybe I can flip it. Flip the normals? No, that hasn't really helped at all. Okay, well, we'll have to do it the old way then, I was going to say. So because we've got this solidify modifier, and because we want the particles to appear after the solidify modifier, the solidify is actually flipping it in an odd way. So what we actually have to do is set these normals to be facing the opposite way that we normally would want it, so that the particles can be in the right direction. Okay, I know this is very confusing. I'm like, oh my goodness, what are you? This is in a beginner tutorial. Yes, but we actually have to do this. So these little blue lines here, let's make it so that they're facing inwards. So here in the toolbar, underneath shading and UVs, let's hit flip direction. Now they're all facing inwards like that. And now when we go out, you can see the hair is now pointing the correct direction, outwards on our thing. We got a little donut afro going on here. But you'll notice that the icing is now pointing inwards. And that's because this solidify amount here, which is this offset, which we just need to flip this around. So let's change the offset to be inverted, and now it's pointing out the correct way. Again, I know this is like, oh, wow, really? Beginner tutorial. You know, 3D software does weird things, which you can't quite understand it when you do it, and this is one of those cases, but sometimes you just have to tweak things to an odd number in order to get it to work. Anyways, the hair is now pointing the correct way. Let's go back to our particle settings. Now, there's a whole bunch of crazy settings here. Stuff that, like, honestly, like, particles have some of the weirdest names for settings that you don't know what they are until you start using them. Like, what is B-spline, you know? Interpolate hair using B-splines. There's a bunch of names there, and it is honestly a little daunting when you first get into it. So I'd encourage you, if you want to get into particles, to just play around with it sometime. But for now, the one setting we want to pay attention to is we want to change these strands to look like our sprinkle. So here, you do that underneath render. So the render is going to tell you what each particle is going to be rendered as. So instead of it being path, which is what these strands are, we're going to change it to object. And then here where it's got duplicate object, we want to click the name of our object that we want to appear as the particles. Now, I haven't actually mentioned this before, but yeah, each object actually has a name, which if you go down in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that our sprinkle name here is actually cylinder.001. So if we want to rename it to something that actually makes sense, go to your object panel over here, and then just type in a name that makes sense, like sprinkle. Go back to your icing here, and then here where it says object, just click sprinkle. Ta-da! And there we go. So we now got a sprinkle appearing over everything, which is great. So, all right, so they're all going in one direction. It looks like ants sort of marching across our icing here. So we want to change its rotation settings. So for that, we need to go to the top of our particle settings here and click on advanced. And honestly, I do this for every particle system that I don't think I've ever created a particle system that wasn't checked on advanced. I don't know what you can actually do without it, but anyways, advanced will give you more options, which you might not want right now, but we need to use it. Now you've got one here that says rotation. So let's check rotation because we want to change it from the default. And instead of velocity hair, I want to change this to normal, which is changing it so that instead of it, I mean, I don't even really know what is velocity hair orientation. Usually when I go through here, honestly, just being completely honest, I scroll through a bunch of these until I find one which actually matches what I want. But generally normal works pretty well. So now that I've set it to normal, you can see it there now all pointing in one direction. They're all sort of sloped inwards there. But I want to make it so that it is it's a random rotation. So they're sort of spinning but flat on there. If you change this one here, you would see it, they all become spiky, right? So that's not actually what we want. I want to change this one on the right-hand side, which is, you know, it's odd that there's two random settings and they do different things, but they're right next to each other and they don't really have a name to tell you what they each do. But that's the particle settings, you know? You fiddle around with it until you get something that you like. In this case, that is what we want. So yay for us. Good. All right. So now we've got some sprinkles appearing, which is fantastic. Now they're a little tiny. Like if we actually have a look at some donut sprinkles, have a look at the size of them on our actual on an actual donut, they're pretty massive. Like they're actually pretty huge, right? So let's increase underneath the physics. Is it physics? No, render? No, it is physics. Let's change the size, increase this until it looks like something that matches the photo. So let's have a look there. All right, so first of all, I think actually our sprinkle here is a little bit too long. So I'm going to scale this along the Z axis and then hit Control A and scale so that we clear the rotation setting, the scale settings. And that looks pretty good. So I'll turn that up again. Maybe I went a little bit too far. Okay, that's pretty good. Honestly, that's... I mean, you could tweak it a little further. 0.15 or something like that. Looks pretty good. Yours will obviously, depending on the size of your sprinkle right now, it'll be different. But just tweak this value to whatever it is that matches a reference photo. All right. So if you change this random size here, what you'd actually find is that each particle now has a different size to it. Which is generally a really good one. Like if you're making a scene with grass or rocks and you've got them displaced everywhere, I usually turn this all the way up to 1 or 0.9 or something like that. But because we've got sprinkles, even though these sprinkles here have different sizes, they generally all have the same thickness, the same fatness to them. But if you're using this random size here, it's scaling it like it's like you've scaled down this here. So they become like they're shrinking. So actually, this isn't really the one we want to tweak. Like we could tweak it, maybe get it up to 0.2 or something like that. It's a little bit better. But if we want to make it so that our particles have different lengths, because you can see we've got long ones and then we've got short ones. So if we want to have that effect, what we actually need to do is we need to create duplicate sprinkles. So I need to make one sprinkle and then I need to duplicate it and make another sprinkle. So let's do that. So I'm going to select this guy. Scale that down, and that's going to be our, short and fat sprinkle. Now, how do we get this to work? Because if you go to the particle settings, you can see that there's only one. You can only select one object. I can go the short, fat one, or I can go with the long one. So what do you actually do? Well, you've actually got an option here which says group, which is something we haven't spoken about. So you can create. You can make a group out of more than one object. So you can create a whole bunch of different objects and then group them together and then reference that group in something like particles here. So the way you do this is shift select all the objects that you want to, make in the group and then hit Control G. And when you do that, you'll see that the outline around your objects now becomes green. And that means it's now part of a group and you won't see anything else. So if you've just created a group, if you hit T, you will see that you can actually name your group there. It's a little hidden. It's like, why is it hidden? If I didn't see that, I wouldn't have been able to name it. But it's down there. If you accidentally, click something else and moved it, you wouldn't be able to see that anymore. So if you do want to name your group, you can also change it in the, is it the object? No? Oh yeah, this one. In the object panel down here, you can change the group there. So let's call this sprinkles, like that. And now with our icing here in the particle settings, underneath group, click sprinkles. And now you can see that it is referencing both of these. You got the long ones and you got the short fat ones, which is great. Awesome. All right, so now let's go ahead. If you go into Shift Z, you can see that it looks like we've got little tic tacs over our donut here, which is not ideal. So let's give it some color. So let's go to split this view, set this to node editor, and then click on new material. Okay, so just like every other object we've created here, I'm going to put it through a mix shader because I want them to, well, actually I should explain, like the first time I made sprinkles, I'm like, oh yeah, sprinkles are just diffuse. Like they're not very shiny, but they actually are. Like, look how shiny they are. Like sprinkles are super shiny. So that was one of the reasons my sprinkles just looked awful. The other reason was that I didn't put a smoothed off cap to my sprinkles. I just made them like hard cylinders. So again, look at your reference image, Come on guys, look at it. All right, so let's do that. And I'll feed it through a glossy shader like this. Diffuse and gloss together. And I'll turn that down to 0.1. I'm just going based off memory of what I think these values will look good at. Okay, and let's give it a color. So I'll make it let's make it a blue color. Let's see how that looks. All right, pretty good. I think the shininess is a bit much, so I'm turning it down. I'm holding down Control and Shift, by the way. So if you're sliding along here, if you hold down Control, that allows you to move in increments of 0.1. If you hold down Shift by itself, it allows you to move in smooth increments. And if you hold down Control and Shift, you can now move it in 0.01 increments. So I'm just turning this down to, I don't know, something like that. I think that looks pretty good. Great. Awesome. All right. And if I want to create it, so if I want to give the same material that I've given to this one, if I want to make it the same material there, it's another thing. Like, well, for one, you could just go to the material panel here and you could select the material there. But here's another tip, and this will come in handy if you've got multiple, like 10 objects that you want to give the same material to. If you select all the objects that you want to have the material applied to, and then the last object, like the object that you want to steal from, you select that one last. So I'll select this one last, and then if you hit Control L, you can copy information from another object. So here where it's got materials, I'm just going to click material. And what that's done is you can see that it's applied this material to it. And you can actually see this count here means the number of objects that now have that material, which is good. So look at that. We got some blue sprinkles all over, all over our donut. I actually think those are not big enough still. So let's increase that. Now that you can see it with color, it's like, yeah, that doesn't look big enough at all. Okay, that's pretty good. Some other settings I haven't actually talked about with the particle settings, but I will now. Where it's got the number, I think 1,000 is overkill. How many is probably here? Probably 300 maybe? Oh, maybe not. 500 maybe? Maybe not, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Either way, we could tweak these values later. Now, the one thing I know that you're probably watching this and you're thinking, okay, can we just address the fact that you've just got blue sprinkles? How do we create different colored sprinkles? Now, you could, if you were really wanting to avoid it, like because you have got this particle system, they are using the information from these individual particles here, which means if you want to create different colored sprinkles, you have to duplicate these particles here and create different colors for each of them, which is what I'm going to do in a second. Now, somebody in the comments might go like, oh, you could use this node with this node, and you could make it so that it references the texture coordinates based on the object information. Way too much work, and honestly, it won't even look proper anyway. So this is really the only way to really go about it. It's time consuming, and I always like to try and reduce the amount of time you spend doing things in 3D, but this is one of those things where you just have to do it. So how many sprinkle colors do I want? We got pink, we got red. Okay, so blue, pink, red, green, orange, white, yellow. That's 7, right? Okay, that's 7. And then, yeah, and they're all, there's short and fat ones and there's long ones as well. So I actually need to duplicate this 7 times, but let's just do it as we need it. So first of all, we should probably give our material a name here because we're going to be copying that information. So I'm going to click, I'll just click this name here and I'm going to call it sprinkle _ blue. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate those 2 sprinkles there. And let's call this, well, first of all, if you want to change the information in another material, like if we just came here and we're like, all right, cool, I got some new sprinkles. I'm going to make this one my green one. What's happened here? They've all become green. And the reason for that is that because you can see this little number here, that means that it's still sharing the information across everything that has that material to it. So let's just set this back to what it was. If I want to make this a green one, for example, first thing I need to do is click this little button here to make it a single user. You can see that it now has .001 at the end, and that number has gone, meaning it's now a sole user by itself. So now if I make it green, you can see that that is now actually it is actually affecting just that one material. So now I could call this one green. Oh, green. All right, and then let's make that second one there, share its same one. And there we go. Okay, so now we've got 2 different types of color there. All right, so now I'm just going to do the very repetitive process of duplicating and changing colors. When I was looking at the reference photos of the sprinkles online, there was like one that was like, I think where was it? It was like down, maybe I lost it, but it was like a photo and it had like a cross through it. And it was a link to the website Snopes. and it was like, is Obama banning sprinkles? Fact or fiction? And I was like, do you really need to click on that link to check if it's to check if that's fact or fiction? Like, really? But then as I was thinking about it more, I was like, it would be I'd love that debate. I'd love to see the backlash that would have. Like if the president of the United States just decided, you know what, I'm just going to put a statewide ban on sprinkles. And then you'd see like the two sides of it. Like you'd have people that are like furious, like how dare he, apply this ban on on something so frivolous. And then you'd have the people on the other side that are like, you guys are yelling about sprinkles. And they'd be like, that's not the point. It's what it stands for. It's the oppression of the government. Just as like a social experiment, maybe. See what happens if you actually try to ban sprinkles, something so frivolous. And I'd also like to see like the reasons that Obama would have to give to actually ban it. Like he'd have that whole meeting at like the I'll make this one white. You'd have that meeting where they bring all the press into the White House. That's like, oh, it's a big announcement. What's he gonna talk about? Immigration or something like that. And they'd all be sitting there and he'd be like, the people of America, we have a lot of enemies today. ISIS, North Korea. But the one enemy that nobody's talking about, sprinkles. And then like smash cut to the reporters, and they're all like looking up from their notes. What did he just say? They're colorful. They're childish. Frankly, they make us look like a bunch of pussies. Like, wow. Oh, I'd love to see it. Just as like his last act in office or something like that. Oh, just the amount of of rage and confusion would be I think it would be the ultimate troll. That would be perfect. Anyways, well, that was a way to kill some time. We've done it. There we go. Look at our colorful sprinkles all over it. Now, as well as this, you could also actually make some of them, because you'll notice looking at the reference photos that they're a little twisty, little all over the place. So if I just select this top one here, move this around, something like this, give it a little bit of a twisted sort of look to it. That's something different, Some of them now have that little twisty sort of look to it. So, if you wanted to, you could duplicate the one that you want to make twisty, like that. And then, I don't know. It's really overkill. And this is something that you can do by yourself. Like, I don't want to just go like, all right, do it if you want. But really, it is. If you want to do this, you can do it for each of it. You can make all the sprinkles unique if you wanted to. I'm just sort of showing you how you would go about doing this. But there you go. All right. So sprinkles, good for us. Now what I'm going to do is, they're actually already on their own layer. They should be all on their layer 3. If you find that maybe you duplicated them and they were on another layer, just select the sprinkles that aren't on the right layer, then just hit M and then move them to the right layer. Okay. It's good because, by the way, if you don't put them on another layer, then when you actually go to render, you would actually find that though they show up in the render as well. Nothing kills realism more than some floating sprinkles. So, little tip. All right. Now, a couple of things looking at this. Like, it still looks very CG, right? And honestly, there's a few reasons for this. One is they all have the exact, like, they're all following this donut perfectly. Okay, that's one. We'll fix that very quickly. But the other one is that if you look at real reference photos of donuts with sprinkles, that there's generally more in one place than another. I think generally speaking, you get more, like if you take the donut and you dip it in this powdery sprinkle thing. There it is, Snopes. Found it. You'd see more right where it would actually, like the peak of the donut. So like right across here, and you would see less as it goes down the icing there. So how do you do that? So we'll talk about both those things. So first of all, let me just hide the rest of the sprinkles. Let's make it so that the rotation, like you can see, it looks pretty flat onto the surface. So if you go here, and that in the particle settings, where is it? In the rotation, this amount here that I said not to touch, if we tweak it just very slightly, if I make it like 0.2, you can see it does automatically look a lot more realistic now. There's some of them are like half sunk in the icing, but they're all at like a little bit more of an angle now. Like don't go too high because then it will look really fake. Okay, that looks like a sprinkled porcupine. So around 0.2, so it's at a slight angle will look pretty nice. Now, the second thing, how do we make it so that they appear in one area more than another? So for that, we need to talk about vertex groups. What? Vertex groups. So, all right, so there is a setting in these particle settings down here where you can make it so that it is, where is it actually? Vertex groups. So that you're actually, the density of the particles is controlled by a vertex group. Now, a vertex group is, well, first of all right, let's just do it. If you hit Control Tab, which is the shortcut, that will enter you into weight paint mode. If you don't want to have to remember that, well, you could get the keyboard shortcut guide in the description, but you could change from object mode to weight paint mode. But I like just Control Tab. Now you can see that it's just made the whole thing look blue. Now what weight paint mode or vertex groups is that each of the, terrible explanation here, that your whole mesh now has a value of either 0 or 1 or anywhere in between the two of them. So blue means a value of 0. So you now have absolute 0 information going on here. But if you push T, you can see that your weight, you can now give it a specific value. And if I just paint right here on the mesh, it looks like a heat map. Okay? So red means a value of 1. Yellow is like, I guess, somewhere like not quite 1, but near it. And then green is like middle value. And then aqua is like almost 0, but not quite. But either way, if you just set that to 1, the strength to 1, and then you just paint with a soft brush, which is what we have now, it'll have this effect here. Okay, and if I go out of weight paint mode, back into object mode, nothing has changed. But if I go down here underneath vertex group and set the density to the group, which will only appear if you've just done some weight painting, if you select that, now it's all matching that weight paint mode. Sorry, the heat map, I guess, that we have just painted on there. All right? So vertex groups, they can be used for a bunch of different things, like, remembering the stupid the wave thing that we set here. Like you could use a vertex group so that, parts of it are untouched. Okay? Oh, get out of here. Or they're the only thing that is touched. You know what I mean? So vertex groups are a way of like telling different parts of the mesh for different things. Like, so you could make one vertex group for that part there, and then you could maybe add another modifier that, does something silly for the bottom, or, like for cloth simulations, right? If you've got a towel, I actually have a towel tutorial if you want to check that out. But like when you have a towel and you want to make it so that the towel looks like it's like hanging on a hook. Well, if you pinpointed and you painted one part of the mesh, you could say this part of the mesh, don't use it as a cloth simulator. So it make it so that it's like hard. Then the rest of it will be smooth cloth, so it'll look like it's now hanging on a hook because you've used that vertex group there. So vertex groups are found underneath here. What is that? Object data vertex groups. So you can name them here. You can give them names. You can make more than one. And they won't actually show up in the render unless you reference it. Okay, so that's vertex groups. We don't want it there, but there you go. Okay, look at that. We've got it. We've got ourselves a donut. So we can tweak these values. I highly encourage you do. These values here that I've done this, I've just done it as I've been talking, and they are not accurate. Okay? So I'm sure that probably some of these values could be better changed somehow. Maybe the size, maybe something else. I have no idea what will actually look good because I've just been rambling about Obama actually. And I haven't really been, you know, I'm not going to give as much attention to this as you are. So your homework really is to just look at reference photos, because this is really what being a 3D artist is all about. Look at reference photos and see how you can make this better. So please do that. I don't want you to follow this and, oh, what value did you use for the such and such? Tweak it. See what looks good for you. I've just done what works for me as I'm doing this, but you can do something far, far better because you can put the time in that I can't for a video, because nobody wants to watch a 3-hour tutorial on sprinkles. So there we go. So that's the sprinkles. Well done. You've done it. Now, I mentioned at the start that as something totally stupid that I would show you how to make it so that it's got donut sprinkles on a donut. So you've got mini donuts across your donut, which I think would make a fantastic fad in the future, maybe. So let's do that now. All right. So maybe you can probably even figure this out without even watching this. But what we're going to do is I'm just going to duplicate our donut here. And for my icing here, first of all, I'm going to clear the particles so that it's just a raw donut. And then I want to make this one object. Okay, now here's a little random tip. But if you're making something a one object, like if I click this and then this, to make it one joined mesh, you'll remember that it is Control J. But when I did that, like, oh, what's going on here? I've lost something, right? And that is because now you don't have that solidify modifier, okay? So your icing was using this solidify modifier. So if I click the icing and then the donut, it's now going to use this modifier across for the entire object, okay? So what you need to do is, if you're in this situation, you need to apply any modifier that you want to use when you've sort of joined the mesh. So I'm going to apply this solidify modifier, and now, because I've actually got the exact same modifier, I can now just Control Shift click on the donut, Control J, and now it looks exactly the same as it did before, which is good. So I'm going to turn down the subdivision, because what I'm going to do now is, if I give this a name, raw donut, and here underneath the particle settings, if I set the render to object, raw donut, we got our raw donut. So let's just turn this down to something really small, like so. Now in some cases like this, the axes at which it has been rotated is very odd. Like it's now rotated it horizontally like that. So what you can do is you can go into edit mode, if you don't want to have to fiddle with all the particle settings, and rotate it by 90 degrees. Like so. And look at that. Looks like you got little Fruit Loops across it, which is completely stupid. But, you know, there you go. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial on particles. Please join me in the next video, which will be talking about lighting and actually making our scene look golden and lovely and smooth lighting. So go ahead and join me in part 8. No, 9, 8. Gosh, what part are we up to? Go ahead and join me in the next video, and I'll see you there. Bye.